Thank you all for coming to the session on mortality patterns. So if anyone was looking for a different session, this is session, 4A, mortality patterns. So my name is Roland University of Rostock and the Max Planck Institute. I have an easy job, and my job is just to keep the time and start early, or not on time, not early. And I would like to introduce the speaker. There's only one paper to be presented, and unless there's a long and lengthy discussion, I think we will have an earlier refreshment break. So I'd like to introduce first Marie-Pier Bergeron Boucher. I hope I pronounced it kind of correctly. She will present a paper she has authored together with Jem Vopel, formerly of the Max Planck Institute, now in the University of Southern Denmark, like Marie-Pier, and Pancho is like how everyone calls him, Francisco Villavicencio. I hope this was not too wrong now. I know him as Pancho. And they wrote a paper on demographic perspectives on the rise of longevity. But we will have a discussant, Edward Tan from the AARP. But I'm pretty sure there will be also plenty of time for discussion, for input, and we're looking forward to a lively discussion. Thank you very much, and I will hand over to Marie-Pier.
Thank you, Roland. So a few years ago, Jem Vopel was here. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, one important thing I should mention is, since number one, it will be recorded, and from my experience 3 years ago, there will be also a transcript made. So once you're participating in discussion, please clearly state your name and affiliation. That will make things much, much easier for the people who do the transcript. Thank you.
No problem. Yes, I was saying, Jem Vopel was here a few years ago and started a conversation here about the rise of longevity. And following this discussion, so we had a bit of funding from AARP to write a paper about demographic perspective on the rise of longevity. So basically with this paper today, we aim at summarizing the finding of some very important demographic paper. Jem Vopel could not be here today, sadly, so he sent me instead. I'm the plan B. I'm not as knowledgeable as Jem, but I'll do my best to answer any question you might have later on. So to start with the presentation, most of you, at least a lot of you, might know that there was a very important increase in life expectancy at birth since the mid-19th century. So around 1850, life expectancy at birth for female, here in the graph, was at value around 45 years, and today life expectancy for females is above 80 years old in a lot of developed countries. So this, at different period of time, life expectancy have been increasing faster or slower, but we generally have seen an increase over time, a sustained increase over time in life expectancy, and the increase still continue in recent years. So this leads to a very important question, which is how much can human lifespan be extended? So can life expectancy keep increasing in the next few decades or even forever? So until recently, the concept of a fixed frontier of survival was the dominant idea about longevity, and it's still a very popular idea today. So arguments behind the concept of a limit to human lifespan. So there's many arguments. So two of them, one of them is evolutionary. So basically evolution does not care about old age because older women are post-reproductive and older men also have lower fertility. They also, as we age, we have the organism lost the ability to maintain homeostasis. So basically we're simply not designed to live longer. The body cannot sustain it. However, there's still a lot of debate around the existence of a value and what this value could be. So if we go back in the literature, they had actually limited success in assessing this limit. So Dublin in 1928 estimated the maximum average longevity for females, so the life expectancy around 64.8, but it didn't know that New Zealand already exceeded this value 7 years earlier. In 1936, Dublin and Lucca re-estimated this value at 69.9, which was exceeded by Iceland 5 years later. In 1941, Dublin again re-estimated this value as 70.8 and was again exceeded by Norway 5 years later. In 1952, Bourgeois-Pichat estimated that the maximum life expectancy for female was around 78.2. This value was exceeded by Iceland in 1974. Then he estimated this value at 80.3, which was exceeded by Iceland 2 years later after the publication. The World Bank and the United Nations also suggested or also estimated a maximum average longevity for female, which was around 82.5. Japan exceeded this value in 1993. So among the most important work or the most cited work mentioning a limit to my life expectancy, we have to mention Fries and Olszewski in 1990. So both papers suggest that maximum life expectancy for both sexes combined is 85 years old. So no country has still exceeded this value. However, in 2017, Japan had a life expectancy for both sexes combined of 84.3 and Hong Kong of 84.8 for both sexes combined. So if we assume that there is a limit to human life expectancy, we're probably going to see a slow convergence toward it, some kind of asymptotic increase. However, if life expectancy, maximum to life expectancy at 85, we must probably going to reach this limit pretty quick and then have a short break. So most likely in the next few years, we might see life expectancy for both sexes combined higher than 85, especially given that current life expectancy have been increasing in recent years. So also second paper, important paper by Olszewski, estimated that maximum average longevity for female was 88. And again, in 2017, in the Human Mortality Database, Japan has a human mortality life expectancy of 87.3 and Hong Kong 87.8. Finally, in 1998, the United Nations estimated that maximum life expectancy would be of 92.5. So we still have no country that are close to exceed this limit. However, is it because we can't exceed this limit or is it because we haven't exceeded it yet? So this is still an open question. So if there is a limit to life expectancy, or if we're close to a limit to life expectancy, we should notice a slower decline in the death rate at different ages, and we should notice limited decline in death rate at high ages. So after a while, we should not be able to make any further progress in mortality. However, a lot of recent studies show that progress in old age survival. So that's a bit weakened this concept of a fixed limit, or at least a foreseeable limit. So at least the fact that we may close to one. So here's the pattern for death rate at age 80 over time since the 1950s for France, Japan, Sweden, and the United States. So for all countries, we see a fairly sustained decline in death rate at age 80 over time. We see very similar trend also for death rate at age 90 over time. So we see that for the US, there was a leveling off in the 1980 up to about years 2000. So we see no decline in death rate, but we see since the 2000 also that death rate at age 90 have been declining in the United States. And if we look even at older age, so here at age 100, so there's more fluctuating trend at age 100, mainly because the smaller population. So to better visualize the trend, and here smoothed the trend. So we see in countries like France and Japan that there was a decline in death rate at age 100. However, this decline is not obvious for the United States or Sweden. So up to about age 100, we generally see a decline in death rate in a lot or in most population. However, from 100 years old and above, it's not clear what are the trends. So is it a decline, is it stable? It depends more across population. So that's also raised a question. Can mortality past 100 be reduced? We still don't have any fix. We don't have any one result or any, so we don't have the answer to it yet. However, can mortality past 100 be reduced, or can it not? And if it can, is it simply because we have not observed it yet? So if we go back in time, for example, if we go back in 1940, we were observing no decline in mortality or in death rate at age 85. This decline started later on. So is it still the case here, or is it just not possible? But So many studies have showed that this progress in old age mortality can be due to a delay in the mortality schedule. So here we have the log death rate over age, and we see for French female in 1950 and 2010. So we said over time, the risk of death has shifted toward higher ages. So that means that death rate in 1950 for French female at around age 55 is equal to the death rate in 2010 of French female around age 63. So there was a delay in the risk of death over time, and this translates, if you look at different indicators in the life table, into a postponement of the death distribution toward older ages. So we have a shift in the mode here. So death happened at higher and higher ages. And this trend, this postponement, or this delay in mortality schedule is still happening today. So it's still a current trend. If we put some value on it, so here in this table, we estimated an age in 1966 that had equal mortality to the mortality at specific ages in 2016. So for example, in 1966, so the death rate at age 40 is equivalent to the death rate at age 50 today in 2016. So depending on the age group, we had a delayed of a shift of the mortality risk of about 5 to 10 years within a 50 years period. So this reduction in mortality at higher ages is generally part of a broader life expectancy revolution. So this is a graph adapted from a paper in Science by Jim Open and Jim Vopil. So here we look at best practice value. So each dot here is represent the highest life expectancy observed within country in the UN mortality database over time. So in 1850, so mostly country like Norway and Sweden had the higher life expectancy. Then in the early 1900s, New Zealand had the highest life expectancy over time. And in recent years, Japan had the highest life expectancy in the last 3 decades. So we see that there's a linear increase over time in the best practice life expectancy. However, if we look at country-specific trend, we have more erratic trajectory. So we can look at France in the 2 World Wars. So there was a peak here, so in the 2 World Wars, so life expectancy have been declining. And if we look into the US, we actually have a level of life expectancy in the US, this is for female, in recent years. So as I shown in previous graph, there's actually progress in reducing death rate in the US at older ages. However, the stagnation of life expectancy in the US in recent years is mainly due to a mortality pattern at younger ages. So here's an example for the death rate for the 4 countries at age 35. So we see that for Japan, France, and Sweden, we have a decline in death rate at age 35. However, for the US, since 1980, we see no progress and even an increase in the death rate in recent years. We have similar pattern also in death rate at age 45. So those patterns are mainly due to external cause of mortality, so accident, injuries, and also partly overdoses, so the opioid crisis as you made here. But this is also somewhat specific to the US, and we see a decline in death rate at early ages for other countries. So living longer is a good thing, but also there's more and more studies that's looking into our lifespan becoming more equal. So there's reduction into inequalities in terms of lifespan. Are people dying at more and more similar ages, or is it one group of people living longer and the other one do not benefit for the similar improvement? So a lot of people looking into lifespan equalities, which basically look into how similar of lifespan in one population. So are people dying at very diverse age, or are death being concentrated within a very narrow age group? So good news, over time, as life expectancy have been improving, lifespan equality also been increasing. So there's a very strong relationship between life expectancy at birth and lifespan equalities. So individuals have been living longer, but also have been having more similar lifespan over time. So here's an example. So for different value of life expectancy, what was lifespan inequality? So modern population are at the tail of the curve. So, but however, we see that for a similar level of life expectancy, the US have had a bit more inequalities in lifespan relative to the other population, but still having this increase in lifespan equality over time. So this relation between the two indicators is actually a very strong relation. So different studies show linear or log linear relation between different measures of lifespan inequalities and life expectancy. This relation has been holding for a long time, so different population having high mortality or even hunter-gatherer Sweden across different point in time, and even among non-human primate. So this is an adaptation of the graph by Erwin published in PNAS in 2016. So far, I'll only be talking about average lifespan or life expectancy. So now if we only look at the tail of the distribution, so what happened with the people who lived the longest over time. So in this graph here, we plot the age of the oldest living individual at different point in time. So for example, if we have an individual becoming the oldest person in 1956 at the age of 108 and die at age 109 1 year later, there's another individual becoming the oldest person and then die at age 107 and then dying at 110. So each line is lifeline of the oldest living person. So what we notice here is that over time, the age on becoming the oldest living person have been increasing over time. So you have to become older and older in order to become the record holder. However, and also at the same time, we see an increase in the age at death of the oldest living person. Then we always have the exception here of Jeanne Calment. So she held the record, or she was the oldest living person for a very long period of time and was the only person living past 120 that have been validated. So some people argue that because no one have broken her record in 20 years, that may be a sign that it's not possible. Again, it can be a bit confusing interpretation, so there's always a difference between a record not being broken yet and unbreakable record. So Adam Leonard and co-authors have estimated that there was about a 25% chance that the record could have been broken by 2016. However, Anthony Medford and co-author have, using extreme value theory, estimated that there was more 75% chance that it could have been broken. So it's still surprising that it still holds. However, it also mentioned that 20 years is not a long time for record not being broken, the longest record being of 52 years yet. So future might inform us if this is an actual limit or not. Another very important question asked by a lot of demographers, yes, we're living longer, but are we living healthier? And sadly, we don't have any definite answer to this question. So the results have been depending a lot on the measure used to measure health. So there's different way of measuring health. It can be based on indicator of chronic disease, it can be an indicator of disabilities, it can be also self-reported health. So if you look into indicator of chronic disease, people tend to have more and more chronic disease or live longer with chronic disease. If we look into disabilities, which is the preferred measure, then we have very mixed results depending on the population, on the age group, and also on the time period. And if you look at self-reported health, well, people tend to say that they live more healthy over time than in the past. So this is also a question we need to answer. So we know that we've been living longer, a more similar lifespan, but what will happen in the future? So do we have an indication what could be the future life expectancy? How long will this trend continue? What they might look like? So if we assume that the current progress observed in recent years continue in the future, we estimate that about 50% of people born this century will live to 100 years old, provided that the current trend continues. So we estimated that progress in life expectancy for this forecast about 2 years per decade, which is the average gain in life expectancy for France, Japan, and Sweden and the US since 1950. However, will the current progress continue? So there's different view about what the future of longevity might look like. So broadly speaking, 3 views. So some people believe that life expectancy will rise more slowly than in the past, maybe approaching a limit generally set at a value not very much higher than current levels. And even some researcher thinks that life expectancy might fall. other researchers expect that life expectancy will continue to rise and mortality to decline at historical pace for the next several decades and even maybe longer. And finally, last group of researchers believe that life expectancy might rise even faster than in the past because of different biomedical breakthrough. So most researchers believe that future life expectancy will be somewhere the first and second view. Either some people believe that the third one might be possible. So why is there so much different views about future of longevity? Well, we all know that, or most people expect that the future will be different than the past, but we don't know how different. So what could improve health and mortality in the future? Well, there's different aspects. So we can expect progress in reducing incidence in cancer and event treating cancer. We currently have evidence that the onset of dementia is being postponed, so this trend might continue. We might have a very efficient public health intervention, for example, in reducing smoking. There's extensive research going on reconstructing or regenerating tissues and organs. Research on nanotechnology might repair damage or destroy cancerous cells, and we might be able also to slow down the rate of aging. However, there's a lot of factors that can also worsen health and mortality in the future. So some example being economic growth in the future might be slower than in the past. We might have less money available for prevention and treatment of disease. New disease might emerge. Wars might break out. We might see an increase in epidemic of obesity or other risk factors that may damage health. The biomedical breakthrough mentioned in the previous slide might not happen, and it might not be possible to reduce mortality after age 100. So given all the uncertainty, how can we forecast mortality? So we're in an actuarial conference. I guess most of you know the value of mortality forecast and very important for planning, for example, in planning the pension system. So mortality forecasts are useful, but given all of this uncertainty, how can we forecast mortality? Well, traditionally, mortality forecast has been done by using expert judgment. So you gather a group of experts and you ask them, what do you think life expectancy or how do you think mortality will decline in the future? So generally, they assume that there was some kind of limit that cannot be passed or put a target value within a few years. So this kind of forecasts have shown to be constant, to produce constantly for life expectancy that forecasts that are too low or to overestimate the value of mortality. So since the 1990s, there was an increased popularity of using extrapolative approach that have been generally more accurate, also depending on the model. So the best way to explain the appeal of using such model was described by John Wilmot in 1998. So he stated that although imperfect, the appeal of extrapolation lies in the long-term stability of the historical mortality decline, which can be attributed to the complex character of the underlying process. This combination of stability and complexity should discourage us from believing that single intervention or burial will substantially alter the course of mortality decline in the future. So basically, the gain in life expectancy that we have been observing over time is not due to only one factor. So there are multiple factors in place, reducing mortality, increasing life expectancy. So for a good example, could be the rise of lung cancer or the rise of smoking in the past. Despite this, there was a lot of countries that show an increase in life expectancy and decline in mortality. So because there was so much more progress being done in other aspects of health and mortality. So the use of extrapolative approaches can be summarized into 3 points. So the advantage of using such approach. So first of all, they use empirical data that often show long-term regularities. So decline in death rate have generally been long linear over time and that have been consistent over a long period of time. And life expectancy often show linear pattern, especially since the 1950s. So we can use this regularity to extrapolate in a close or maybe not so close future. They're generally more objective than the use of expert judgment. And also they allow to produce probability distribution. So we can create a prediction, 95 or 80% prediction interval within which you can be confident that the future value might lie within. So another question now, how to extrapolate the trend? So which model should we use? They actually multiple extrapolative forecast methods that have been suggested since the 1990s, and we still don't have any consensus about which one to use. So different models tend to perform best on specific population over specific time period. So here's an example for a forecast of the US up to 2070. So this is for both sex combined, and I'm comparing 6 different extrapolative methods with the official forecast from the Bureau of Statistics in the US. So the first model compare is the Lee Carter, which is the golden standard, if we want, in mortality forecasting. That's been developed in 1992 by Roland, Lee, and Carter. So in simple words, basically the model assumes that the rate of decline in the death rate in the past will persist in the future. But as mortality decline was faster at younger ages than at older ages, the model keep this trend in the forecast. So over time, life expectancy become more and more dependent on mortality reduction at older ages. So when this happened, because decline in death rate was slower at older ages, then we saw deceleration in the increase in life expectancy in the forecast. So it's the light blue trend here. Then the second model we compare is the Lee and Lee model developed in 2005, which is an extension of the Lee Carter model and is a method in a class of model called coherent. So coherent forecasting. So this came in the idea that populations are not independent from one another. So we have seen a convergence in mortality trend up to the 1990s, and we see that generally mortality trend across different countries do not significantly diverge from one another. They stay consistent. But if we forecast them independently, the trend tend to diverge. So to have more consistent forecasts with one another, Lee and Lee suggest that we forecast an average mortality trend for the population and then forecast the gap between the country-specific level and the average. So here, if we assume that the life expectancy for the US will stay consistent, or at least do not diverge significantly for the level of Sweden, France, and Japan, so we have value of life expectancy quite a bit higher in the future than those of the Lee Carter here. Then the two other model, the CODA and CODA coherent. They're similar to the Lee Carter and the Lee and Lee model, but instead of forecasting death rate, we forecast the death distribution. So by simply using a different indicator in the life table, we're able to produce forecasts that are more optimistic than forecasts based on the death rate. So basically with those models, we allow the rate of mortality improvement in the death rate to accelerate over time. So with those models, again, we have more optimistic forecast here. Then finally, we have two other models that is based on extrapolative life expectancy, trends in life expectancy at birth directly. So the first one, it's a simple extrapolation of increase in life expectancy. So here in pink. And in red is, instead of using an average mortality trend to produce coherent forecast, we use the best practice increase in life expectancy. So basically, the future trend in life expectancy will stay consistent with the best practice. So by using this different model, we have difference by 2017 life expectancy of about 7 years. So which one works the best? So in countries like US, so the way we evaluate the accuracy of a model basically is that we try to forecast current level of life expectancy. So we can use data from 1950 to 2000 and try to forecast mortality for 2001 to 2016 and see how good the model is performing. Because in the US, we have a deceleration in life expectancy in recent years, so models that forecast lower progress in life expectancy, such as the Lee Carter, tend to perform better for the US. So we also compare the forecast here with the official forecast. So we see here it's a bit lower, so the forecast for the US make use of expert judgment in the forecast, and as a general pattern, when this is used, the forecasts are always a bit lower. However, if we look at the case of France here, so for France, that showed a linear increase in life expectancy model that tend to forecast more optimistic values tend to perform better. To forecast France, it may be better to use other models than the Lee Carter and the Lee and Lee, for example. So again, it's very hard to assess which model works the best, and each model can give very different value. So given that the need for accurate and robust forecast, how can we produce such forecast? Well, there's no one definite answer, but there's still a lot of research that could be done in this perspective. So we could, for example, incorporate cohort effect in the forecast. That have been done by some research in the past that generally showed to increase the fit. However, the forecast accuracy is also depends strongly on the country you forecast the mortality on. You can also include information on health, also information on socioeconomic information. However, there is a lot of attempt in including some covariates in the forecast, and they show limited success. One of the main reasons is that sometimes you have to forecast also the covariates in the future, and sometimes these trends are not don't show any steady patterns, and also the So the relation between the different covariants and the relation with health and mortality is not always perfectly understood. So that makes the full the use of health and economic information in the forecast always more complex. But that doesn't mean we should not try, and maybe in the future people will find a better way to make use of such information. We can also model heterogeneity in the forecast. We should find better prediction intervals. So this, I don't put a question mark, this have to be done. So prediction intervals have not been very accurate so far. So they tend to either be too small or too large. And again, it depends on the countries. We can use Bayesian approach. So that's what the UN is doing. So base the forecast on some prior information. And even if so far the use of expert judgment have not produced very accurate forecasts, we might find a way to make structured use of expert judgment. So it might be able to anticipate some trend based on some information of expert, but maybe not base a full forecast only on the judgment. So there's only a few suggestions. And just to let you on a sentence from Jim Vopel. So the social, economic, health, cultural, and political consequences of future increase in longevity are such significance that the development of more powerful method of forecasting is a priority. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Marie-Pier. I guess many people have many pressing questions and are keenly interested to ask a few questions to Marie-Pier, but we would like to start with the discussant.
Hi, thank you very much. And I just want to say that Dr. Bergeron, Boucher, that you are not a plan B at all, but a very good alternate plan A. ARP is a U.S. organization, a nonprofit, has many arms, but we have 38 million members. So it's a very large organization that spans the U.S. That speaks directly to consumers. I work for the membership arm and specifically the policy arm, and I'm the director of Thought Leadership Health. My background is not an actuary, but a physician, a geriatrician. And so I am very interested in this issue, both as an individual and from an organizational perspective. ARP had the privilege of having Dr. Vopel and Dr. Olshansky speak to us in 2017, and we've subsequently been engaged with both these thought leaders on these issues. In terms of the value of these empiric predictions, I mean, your modeling is based, can explain why, and it does describe the past, and your forecast provides us options for the future. One of the things that I thought about when I first heard of this is this concept of Moore's Law. Moore's Law is an empirical relationship that was first postulated by George Moore in 1965. He was the CEO of Intel, and he noted that the density of superconductors and integrated circuits was doubling at that time about every year. It subsequently changed to every 2 years, and maybe have slowed down. But that Moore's Law prediction, although empiric, also provided the industry with guideposts and development goals as well. And in a previous discussion, we discussed, could the best practices be used by policymakers as a guide to what we should attain to? Some, I would say, like Dr. Olshansky would say, that it is health span more than lifespan that we should strive for. You also said that the causes, individual causes for increases in life expectancy over time varied by time in terms of increases in life expectancy historically have been at younger ages, then subsequently at higher ages as well. And also each country is very different. However, one of the questions I had for you is this issue of lifespan equality. So is there a way to think of lifespan equality as a policy goal? And is there a way to include expected increases in lifespan equality in future equation modeling for forecasts so that policymakers could understand what the benefits might be of increasing lifespan equality, which is something that from ARP's perspective, as a social mission organization, is as a high priority. Just want to ask you that question.
So there was a multiple facet of the question. So to discuss first lifespan disparity. So an easy answer into we include this in the forecast. Actually, there's a paper by Roland, you can correct me, Christina was the first author, Christina Bock, into trying to use lifespan disparity as a tool to evaluate how accurate is the forecast. So do we forecast also decrease, continue trend in the change in lifespan equality, or is it a fundamental break? So it's been slowly included also in the forecast and in the use. Now, can we aim to decrease disparities? That's a very, ideally, yes, we should decrease inequalities and disparities. However, it's very different between countries, and each country have different issue with different disparities. So in the US, which is, again, a very specific case, so there are very large disparities, not only among individuals, but also when you look into difference in socioeconomic status, a difference between race. And in other countries, we don't have such large disparities. So the US could aim in reducing those. And because ages that affect lifespan disparity are generally younger ages, so generally it's ages below the mode. So by trying to reduce mortality at younger ages, you can both address the gap in life expectancy with other countries and maybe reduce lifespan disparity simultaneously. But how to reduce it, it's a very complex question again, because it's not a unifactor, it's not one factor in place. So I'm not an expert specifically on the US, so I don't have the solution for a US audience, but it can definitely be looked into. I don't know if it answers your question.
That's good.
Okay.
And I know we have a first question here. Would you like to go ahead and please introduce yourself and your institution?
Thank you, Dr. Tan, and thank you for your presentation. Yeah, my question follows up on the doctor's. I'm Carl Pulzer, and I have a project called the Center on Capital and Social Equity, which looks at economic inequality and wealth concentration, and I advocate to include the bottom more, rather than just attack the top 1%. But, so yesterday I gave a presentation, and it was U.S. specific, about how growing inequality, economic inequality, might be impacting the prospects for social insurance and Social Security. So we're seeing in the United States a divergence in lifespan between the top and bottom quintiles, a very significant one for many years, and it seems to be still there. There's 4 or 5 studies showing this. I think the National Academy of Sciences did a comparison of a cohort born in 1930 and 1960, and I think it grew by 7 years. And the poorest people aren't living any longer, or very little longer. Okay, so one thing I wanted to ask about was if you were going to try to, like for Social Security, people only start collecting for retirement after age 62. If you're going to there's some testing going on about whether the gap is increasing. But if you're only going to draw data from people already receiving benefits, how would you have the data be sensitive to change most of the loss of life expectancies, in the middle age, or younger people taking drugs and this and that? Angus Deaton and Ann Case's work about the deaths of despair. So the people in middle age that are whites are actually, their life expectancy is declining, and that would only echo into the old age programs later. So how do you detect and forecast and build a factor in for that? And the other thing is, it was interesting, I noticed that when life expectancy changes at middle age, it was going up in your graph. There was sort of a magnification effect later on, because the whole graph moves over 5 years. What if it's going down? So in other words, when you're forecasting life expectancy based on a decrease in life expectancy in middle age, what's the mathematical relationship between that and what you would forecast for older ages? So those are my questions.
Can you repeat the last one? I'm not sure I understand. Which graph are you referring to? It's
Well, when you talk about some of the modelers are saying that because most of the difference in life expectancy happens at younger ages, it doesn't affect older age life expectancy very much. I just want to know, how does that work? Is it greater or lesser? How does it, mathematically?
in the forecast.
Yeah.
So again, it will depend a lot on the forecast method. So if you look again at the Descartes model, then if you use a fitting period that show slower mortality improvement, they will be maintained in the forecast. So if we use, like in middle age, if we assume that mortality is not improving, and we use data since 1980 where there was no improvement, then this model will keep this pattern in the future. So we'll foresee no fast improvement in death rate at age 35 or 45, for example. With other model, some model will show a faster improvement, other none, other sometimes can increase. It's really, there's a very wide variety of model. So you have to look into the assumption behind each model. So here I give you a range of different options. But yeah, if you use a Descartes model, which is often this model or some kind of extension of this model that are being used by different statistical offices or being used or being extended, you generally see a constant progress. Then your first question was related with how can we...
When you observe, if you're trying to look at a gap in life expectancy, if the data is drawn from a whole population or from one segment, just from the people eligible at old age versus earlier times, do you get a different forecast? I mean, do you get a different analysis?
So yeah, if we disaggregate, if we split the different population by different socioeconomic group, for example, and then try to reunificate, to bring all the socioeconomic group into one big population, their forecast will also be different. So they also forecasts also sensitive on how you divide your population and how you forecast life expectancy for each and how you regroup them. So they're generally quite sensitive to a lot of different choice.
Sorry, although I'm the moderator, I'd like to quickly follow up since I'm a co-author of several of those lifespan inequality papers. May I just go back? Inequality is a big topic. Do you have somewhere the...
Yes.
We're going in the right direction.
Too far?
Log death rate. Where's the inequality one?
Here.
So lifespan equality, inequality, lifespan disparity, Gini coefficient, number of life years lost. There's various concepts how to measure inequality. What I'd like to stress is this is not about socioeconomic groups. This is a common misunderstanding when we present socioeconomic groups, education or whatever. What it measures basically is the concentration of the density of death. So this is what we're measuring. It's not about socioeconomic groups, not to give any wrong impressions. And it doesn't matter if you use the Gini coefficient or any of those other measures. It's a measure of the concentration or disconcentration of the density of death.
So just to illustrate the concept, so if you look in 1950, lifespan inequalities is larger than in 2010. So here deaths are more concentrated within a narrower age group. So this is the concept of lifespan inequality and inequalities that we measure here. So to just follow up,
Hi, I'm Steve Goss, actuary at U.S. Social Security System. If you could just flip back to your slide 28, I just wanted to speak just momentarily and sort of raise a couple of issues about what you referred to. And by the way, we always refer to our projections as projections under specified and specific assumptions as opposed to forecasts per se. We leave that to the weathermen. But in any case, in terms of a projection methodology, I just want to suggest that you were talking about some of these methods being involved in judgment versus not. The first judgment in any projection of mortality in the future is what methodology to use. So every single one of these is obviously highly judgmental, and given a whole range of possibilities, the first element of judgment is which way to go on this. By the way, I wish Jim were here, Jim Vopel. I've known him for a long time. We've had many, many debates in the past. I don't know, hope you'll give my regards to him when you get back to Denmark. And we've had many debates in the past, and just to give you one little example, you're talking about accuracy of projections that have been made. We sometimes say that at the U.S. Social Security system, the last time our projections of mortality really mattered a lot was probably back around 1982, 1983 when we had our last major amendments, which was the first time in history that the U.S. Social Security system had a schedule changed in the sort of forward normal retirement age for the program. And that was based on our projections that we had in our 1982 trustees report going way back when. And this is an especially informative graph because you can see at the time, and years up through about 1982, we had gone through a wonderful period where Medicare and Medicaid had come online. We'd had antibiotics post-World War II. There was dramatic economic growth. And as you show in your graph here, we had a big increase in the actual level of what you're looking at here as life expectancy at birth. Our projections were not quite that optimistic. We assumed that we understood the conditions that had contributed towards that period, and we're expecting that we would not have as strong an effect in the future. Jim and many other people were, of course, extrapolating, as Ron Lee and company would, off of just what the past trends are, just sort of pardon the word, simplistically, just sort of fitting to the past history. And they were projecting dramatic increases. As it turns out, the life expectancy that really matters for our social insurance systems is really much more life expectancy at something like 65 than at birth. And as it turns out, the projections that we're making for life expectancy at 65, male and female combined, in 1982, it turned out that actually within 1/10 of a year, that was achieved for the year 2010. And since 2010, of course, the life expectancy that's actually realized in the United States has fallen short of what our projections were. Now, all the other messages you referred to here would have projected very substantially higher rates of improvement. So at least in this one ex post analysis that you can look at where it matters, and we have actual data, not just sort of expectations in the future. If you want to look to accuracy, I think actually what I'm assuming you're saying is official method here actually sort of won in that regard. One of the things I just wanted to mention with respect to what Carl was saying about impact, and I think, by the way, just a little pitch. Asia and Adrian and I and Sam Gutterman are going to be at a little panel after lunch, so I hope you'll all be there. We're going to be talking a lot more about some of these topics. But in terms of life expectancy at birth, obviously for life expectancy at any age X, the most important factor, the one that has the most leverage on that life expectancy, is death rates at or immediately above age X. So life expectancy at birth, infant mortality is what really matters. And so to be looking over a historical period where infant mortality at one point in time back a century or two ago was extremely high, and that's been brought down to exceedingly low levels now, to a degree you sort of run out of gas on that which matters most for life expectancy at birth. So to maintain a linear trend in the future, Jim, it would be quite a challenge, and we'll see. So maybe offline we can talk a little bit more about when Jim Vopel and Jim Oppen first came out with the Best Nations thing, and they brought it out of Duke University, and some of the fun discussions we had at that time, including also John Wilmoth.
Yeah. Thank you. I would say I agree. Like it's when I say it's more objective, extrapolative approach, but they're not 100% objective. And we have some papers also coming out where we look at the choice forecaster have to face even when using an extrapolative approach. So just using the fitting period. So if you use data back to 1950, you might have faster mortality improvement in infant than if you look in the recent trend. So just a different fitting period have an impact, a big impact on your forecast. The method you use can also, when you use current forecast, which reference population should you use, that will affect also your forecast. So a lot of extrapolative approach are sensitive, so that's also one of the need to develop better approach. And yes, I'm sorry, it's written forecast, but yeah, for the official, it's more projection. Yes, that's a proper definition. That was used to combine, because we compare generally different countries. Sometimes it's forecast, sometimes it's projection, sometimes they use expert judgment, sometimes not. But yes, you agree with the methodology. Then in terms of continue linear increase, so this is also a hard debate. Will it continue to be linear? Will it accelerate? Will it decelerate? So it's also a very hard one to answer because we either have to wait a couple of years to validate the forecast on actual value, or we have to go back on like forecast historical trend and try to see how it did for the recent past, hoping that it will reflect what happened in the next couple of years. But again, future might be different in the past, so it's a very hard field because you have a lot of trouble validating, and it's very sensitive to different measures. So I don't know if it answers a bit.
Yes. Good morning, Linda Stone from the American Academy of Actuaries. Thank you for this presentation. For those of us who aren't experts in this area, I would be interested in some more perspective on the one slide you showed that said there's really 3 thoughts on what's going to happen to longevity in the future. You know, we're kind of where we are. We're going to, continue growing. Is there, certain fields of study where, all of those folks think one thing and folks with another expertise think something differently? Just to try to put a little more perspective on where some of those different assumptions might be coming from. Thank you. So I mainly know the demographic field, so I cannot talk for other field of studies. But just within demography, there's all those views have been shared by different demographers, and the different views generally come from different perspective on the trend. So some people tend to focus on what's happening that is worse than in the past currently, and how this could affect in the future. Other people is like, well, yes, that might happen, but that might not have as big of an effect. Other people may be looking more at medical breakthroughs, say, well, if we look in 1950, we find a way to reduce cardiovascular mortality, we find a way to reduce cancer, we should find a way also to reduce other disease coming our way. So it really depends on which aspect of mortality and health people are focusing on, and what's the perception on how this affects mortality and how it might continue in the future. So it's a very hard question because it really depends on the people, and I don't think there's one main idea per field, because even so we're discussing about slowing down the rate of aging. So some people think it's possible, others think it's science fiction, others think so and they all in medical world. So I don't have any. So it maybe depend on your own expertise, on your own analysis of the data. So sorry, I don't have any fixed answer.
Hello, my name is Asibilika. I'm a Chief Actuary of the Canadian Social Security. And thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. I just wonder, when you do your projections, are you, we don't live just in biological world. We also live in economical world and in environmental world. So do you consider impact of future economic growth, future pressure of the aging population on healthcare system, impacts of climate changes, a lot of uncertainties that are coming forward in your projections? Thank you.
I'm not focusing on this personally, but I know a lot of people are looking at the economic consequences of increase in life expectancy, and I think I'm in the right audience for people analyzing such trends. So, but I could not. This is not necessarily my field of expertise in actuarial, so I don't feel comfortable answering those questions fully. But I can maybe refer you to some papers if you're interested after to look into this.
Can I also answer quickly on this question? The problem is, I think, yes, we know that the economy affects health and life expectancy, but if we try to include economic variables, we know at least since 1975, gross domestic product and life expectancy, the relationship on the aggregate level, paper by Sam Preston, we would need to forecast the economy. And I think that's even more difficult to forecast than to forecast mortality and life expectancy. So I think everyone who's in the forecasting field agrees, yes, those are important covariates influencing factors, but it's way more difficult to forecast GDP over time or other variables, maybe also about the environment, than if you look at the regularity of mortality curves, how log linear or linearly, they were declining over time. So I think that's one of the reasons why it's not so prominently featured in forecasting approaches.
I totally agree with you, but in this case, I probably would suggest that you will speak a little bit more, how do I say, mildly about the judgment. Because when we go to the judgment approach, these are kind of the factors that we're looking at when we apply judgment in our projections. Thank you.
Hello, Maddie Boucher. I'm a social epidemiologist from University College London. I'm a first-time attender. I'm really impressed by the work that's been presented in this conference. Death is an outcome which is fixed, easily measured, and I'm impressed by the models that you've used to forecast. But in terms of the three sort of types of forecasts that you put in one slide, those could happen simultaneously for different social groups. And that is my concern, that if you only use death as your predictor and don't look back at the sort of upstream factors which are related to differentials in death, then it's very difficult to have any plausibility in these forecasts other than statistical plausibility. So, some of the research, and this is the plug that I'm doing for my research, is looking at sort of models which begin with old people healthy at, let's say, age 45, and then different social groups over the life course getting disease at different ages. And we find that between the most and the least affluent groups, the difference in getting disease, and this is using very large databases, is about 10 years, starting healthy at 45. And then the progression, the pace of progression to death is much faster. And this is for multimorbidity. So, we do need to look more upstream at social causes and economic causes and over the entire life course to actually understand why differentials matter and how they'll play out in terms of overall life expectancy and the forecasts therein.
I would say I agree that that should be the way to go to almost in the forecast, to have more information about what is happening and even to understand more the process. I can say in terms of forecast, it have been tried before. So, and sadly, it was very hard to compute, and the result of a previously published paper were not as satisfactory as one might help, because there's a lot of sometimes correlation between different covariates, and sometimes the relation between, for example, if you look into smoking only, so more if you have a population of a high smoking rate, a lot of people will develop, for example, lung cancer or respiratory disease, and eventually leave at higher death rate of those causes. But trying to estimate, okay, I need to know how many people in the population are smokers, how many of them will develop a disease, and how many of them will eventually die. And this quantification of multiple steps is what is complicated in forecasting. And it has been tried, and I think it's very important that we keep on trying. We just don't have any model that have been, working very well while hiding a lot of covariates. So again, I agree that it should be done that way. It's just not so simple.
No, I agree. It's completely very, very complex.
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear that there have been models that have been tried. I'd love to hear, what the papers are and get the references. But even using Nordic data, which tracks people across the life course and has all the covariates included, you find that people who don't smoke, this is the normal sort of comeback, that people who are deprived, have poor lifestyles, they smoke, they drink, and so on. But if you even compare those who don't smoke and have equivalent lifestyles to people who are well off, they have lower life expectancies. So it's not just about lifestyles.
But it's the same kind of computing also, that adding socioeconomic information into it. So it leads to similar, it makes always the model more complex and a bit harder to fit in to create a more accurate forecast. So there are people looking into forecasting by socioeconomic group. So really trying to forecast mortality for lower socioeconomic status, middle, high, and then try to combine it back. So there's also some effort that have been done in that direction. But yeah, so the...
I'll get back to you about
okay.
So I'm just trying to respond as a political economist. There's to Roland's, well, hey, so just concentration of death and as demographers. So Chetty et al. Have just done a study in the U.S. that there's a very linear relationship between income, lifetime income, and death. So there is an impact. Now, you might say, okay, for the purposes of estimating a whole program, what if you have the super Iceland, on stilts society, everybody has the same income, and then the U.S. is a very unequal society. On average, it's not going to make that much difference. But for the purposes of changing the program, and the policymaker calls you up from the parliament, right? It makes a hell of a difference. If this political constituency thinks they're not getting something out of a program versus that, so that if you do a cost-benefit analysis compared to your mortality compared to the amount of taxes you're paying in, is it a regressive tax, is it a progressive tax? It's something, that's how it's going to play out in reality, and it could change what people get if the Congress or the Parliament changes the law as a result. So you guys are kind of playing into that, and I just throw that out. Does that make sense?
It was a question for you.
Yeah, since it was mainly for me, yes, I agree completely, and I also worked on socioeconomic difference in mortality in the past, how they develop over time between different socioeconomic groups, also in terms of causes of death. My remark beforehand was just to make sure that the measure we're looking at here has nothing to do with socioeconomic groups. This doesn't mean it's not important, but sometimes when you present those results on lifespan equality, inequality, people could misunderstand that we're talking about socioeconomic groups, and that's not the case with this measurement here.
It's different.
I do not want to say it doesn't matter, it matters a lot, and I'm still involved in several projects looking at socioeconomic differences in mortality by education or income and so on. No, I completely agree, and this is what's most important to policymakers.
You're just trying
correct.
not to mix them up. Thanks.
Exactly, that's what I wanted to point out.
Yeah, hi, yeah. Steve Goss from U.S. Social Security, back again, sorry. But just want to make a little further comment about sort of the nature, and thank you for keeping slide 28 up there. A comment about the choice of different approaches for making projections. And again, I wish Ron Lee were here because he could speak to his approach. And Ron Lee, I guarantee you, would be the first one to say that his approach is a projection methodology. And the most important aspect of any projection methodology is what are the conditions under which your projection will actually come true? And all of what you refer to as extrapolative methods have a very specific assumption. And you addressed this very nicely. They presume that the conditions that contributed towards the historical period that you're fitting your extrapolation to will be occurring similarly or in the same fashion in the future. And that's a very, very strong judgmental decision to claim that, especially to pick for a period between 1950 and recent. That's a period of incredible increase in longevity and decline in mortality for things that may or may not be replicatable in the future. We will see. There could be breakthroughs, and we're all hopeful. But I just want to really make the point that really we should be very, very careful. For example, the Liam Carter method, Ron would not refer to that as a forecast. He would say that's an extrapolation projection based on very specific conditionalities, which is not just that mortality will continue to decline in the future at the same rate as in the past, but by age and sex. And I would just offer something else, a little work that we did in our office a while back, about 2 or 3 years ago with Ron, looking at his projections of life expectancy and mortality. And as you show here, his projection of life expectancy at birth is to increase substantially more than our so-called official projection. But you have to also ask the question with any of these, what is the purpose of making these projections? How are you using them? For the purpose of Social Security cost, where we worry most about how many people will be alive at older ages versus younger ages, Ron, by projecting mortality improvement, age and gender specific in the future, continued very, very strong improvement in mortality at younger ages and less mortality improvement than we project at older ages. We project a compression of the age gradient. He, of course, by the nature of his method, explicitly projected the same age reading going into the future. That results in a lot of increase in life expectancy at birth by having much lower death rates increasingly at younger ages, less increase at higher ages, and as it turned out, the age dependency ratio from his approach and our approach are very similar, even though life expectancy at birth are dramatically different. So again, I would suggest be careful about what metrics and what statistics you're looking at, and make sure you're looking at statistics that are really germane to the particular questions you have at hand. And for many of us in this room working on social insurance, life expectancy in birth really is not that statistic. So I mean, please take it back to Jim. Let's look more at things like age dependency ratios, things like that, which are actually more germane to a lot of the kinds of work that many people in this room do.
Thank you. Okay.
Hi, Nargis Doratoltas from AIR Worldwide. I just wanted to continue on what you mentioned, which is very important, and what you mentioned. As modelers, sometimes we get into the trap that we want to provide the best fit of the historical data, and whenever we get to the best fit, we assume that we get the best projection, which is not the case. And I think this is the best place to raise that, to bring that to our awareness that we should figure out why we do the fitting, the methodology that we use, and how we should separate different like the risk factors that may cause that for different age groups, for different genders, for different locations. And as complex as it looks and as it's scary as it looks, I think it is very scary, because the projection is a very serious job that we are doing, which impacts lots of, I don't know, like economically, or for the policymakers, it makes a very, very important impact on the decisions that people make. And what I suggest as modeler, and I think you're doing a very great job on providing the perspective on what we do in a big picture, is that be aware of why we are doing that, and don't get very proud if we get the best fit for providing the projection based on that. Because sometimes it gets us to the wrong projection. As you mentioned, that most of the projections that we are seeing are providing a low fit or high fit or unpredictable. We should accept that human behavior, human biology is sometimes, most times, uncertain and unpredictable, and be prepared for that, and just don't close our eyes and be very, very proud of our judgments. So just wanted to bring that to our attention. As a modeler, I'm ruining my own job, but I'm just telling you, this is the reality that sometimes we forget about it.
Yeah, thank you. No, I agree. And to come back into the fitting, so that's increasing our debate also in forecasting. So do you want a model that fit current mortality well, or you want to forecast, that produce an accurate forecast? And those generally not the same model. So there's always a way to increase the fit of in simple evaluation of your model, and then that will not necessarily produce a forecast that is the most accurate. So less and less it is recommended to look into the fit, but more using this kind of out of sample analysis. So try to forecast very recent trend, or wait to see how it goes. And also in terms of, there's a lot of uncertainty in the future, and that I discuss it a bit. So, and I think that's one reason maybe using prediction interval to some extent could also be an option. So even if your forecast is not totally accurate, but if you still have the future value somewhere in your prediction interval, that could be a good added value of your model. So, but yeah, it's very difficult to estimate what forecast works best and for how long and in which population and in which subpopulation. So, but yeah, I agree with your comments. Thank you. Yes.
Hi, Eric Pickett from Club Vita. I think you've, in fact, we're just coming round to what my question was going to be about. In that, this discussion has shown that there is a lot of different projection methods that we can use, and that can be justified in many different ways. I mean, it really highlights that future projections of life expectancy show a real risk of, longevity is a risk in the future. There's a big range of outcomes that could happen. And I think we get bogged down in trying to come up with the best estimate. And maybe we need to be communicating the range of outcomes in the future and thinking about the longevity as a risk rather than trying to get the best projection. We did some work on climate change predictions, and I was reading a bit on stuff on climate change research, and the sort of consensus there is very much don't get too bogged down in what the best estimate of what will happen is. Make sure you're prepared for what could happen. And I think this is really important for longevity.
Okay. Okay. You have no, I agree. There was a follow-up also on this kind of range of possible values, and that maybe the prediction, the intervals is at least the interval is reliable, even if the point forecast is maybe a bit above or lower the value. So that's a follow-up on. Yes, thank you.
So if there's no further question, I'd like to conclude the session maybe with a few words, also my own opinion, like what was mentioned in the end, the uncertainty. This is, I think, an important issue that we should not use maybe some deterministic projections or forecasts, but show the people how uncertain we are, given our model is correct. Given our model is correct, there's a lot of stochastic insecurity, uncertainty. So this should give people some impression. And I also agree it would be wonderful if we included really some kind of plausible theory. But the past has shown us whenever people introduce some plausibility, it doesn't really work in reality. Simple example, 10 years, 12 years ago, we had economic issues, recession, also in Europe. What would you expect? Well, life expectancy will go up faster in Greece, which was hit heavily, or Germany. Life expectancy went up faster in Greece than in Germany. So it's very, very hard to create a plausible model of like how will mortality, life expectancy develop on those external factors which for sure matter. And I think in the past, being an extrapolist, anonymous, this is I think what Aubrey de Grey wrote once in a paper about demographers calling them, I think, extrapaholics anonymous, was looking at the results was still the best method so far, but I think looking for a way to model it better, this is our challenge at the moment. Thank you very much for attending this session. Thank you very much to Marie-Pier and